talking about astronomy to the public. I also did ComSciCon, which is a more broad science communication thing. So I met people in different scientific fields who were also interested in science communication. And then after I got my PhD in 2016, I was awarded a AAAS Mass Media Fellowship, which meant I got to be a science journalist for a news organization. So it basically just like threw me into the science communication world. And through all of these processes, I realized like, oh, I have all of these transferable skills that really open up my options to other careers, like project management, teamwork, writing. All of these things are things that you need to be able to do in many different career situations. So because after I got the AAAS Mass Media Fellowship and I went through all of that, I had very many different jobs before landing here at Penn. So after I got my PhD, I did the AAAS Mass Media Fellowship, and then I was an adjunct professor. And it was part-time, and it was, like if you ever want to have a session on adjuncting, I will be there to talk about it. I have many opinions. After that, I got a full-time job as a associate editor for Outpatient Surgery magazine, which is not my field. I was a physicist. And then I got this job, but because of my science communication background, they hired me to do that. I worked there for about 5 months, and then I quit for reasons we can discuss at another career services event if it's ever applicable. After that, I was a subject matter expert in astronomy for WebAssign, which is this online platform that basically will like auto grade questions for professors. So it's a good way to like put in tests and homework questions and have them auto graded. So I came up with a bunch of astronomy questions for them, basically. And I was also a search engine optimization writer for a local company called Ferrotech. And then finally in 2018, I got hired at Penn to be a staff writer for Penn Medicine Development and Alumni Relations. Again, not my field, but because I had science communication background, they knew that I could write about the exciting things happening at Penn Medicine and then get people to donate money to them. That's basically what I did. And then that led me to the job at the Grad Center, which was ultimately my dream job, working with grad students. So for all of these jobs, I had to convince them that they wanted to hire a PhD. Because I don't know if any of you are in the job search right now. A lot of times like at least I found, a lot of companies would like overlook me because I had this ridiculous credential, a PhD, and they're like, why is she applying for this job? But then other people would be like, oh, she has a PhD. Why is she applying for this job? And they could actually interview me because they wanted to find out what was going on. So it can be a little, hit or miss when you're applying for jobs like that. But you do have all of these skills that, you can apply to all of these jobs. And the idea here is that you just need to identify those skills and how they apply to the career that you want to do. And then you just have to figure out what the important components are and make sure you emphasize those when you're doing your interviews and writing your cover letters and things like that. So I want to start this by talking about some of the skills that you may have achieved, as a doctoral student. So these are some things that I just thought of off the top of my head. Like as a doctoral student, you have project management experience, writing experience, team management, possibly, event planning, possibly. You can do data analysis and data synthesis. So you can take everything you analyzed, pull out the important stuff, and tell the person who cares about that important stuff what they need to know. And also presentation and public speaking and things like that. You are doing all of these things as a doctoral student. And how do you do them? Like, how do you accomplish these things? Well, in order to do project management and or team management, you need leadership skills. So you need to be able to lead something. You clearly have time management skills, whether or not you believe it, you do, because you are getting things done as you are progressing through your doctoral degree. You have some sort of organizational skills, or how else would you keep track of everything that you need to do? You are resourceful. You can work in a team. Even if that team is just you and your advisor, that's still a team, right? You probably have some experience managing up. That is something that is super important in the world of anything, like any job. You will likely at some point in your life have to manage up, and it can be like, whoa. But you're probably doing it now, honestly. And commitment. You can start something and finish it. And these are all things that companies are looking for. Like if you read their mission statements, if you read the job descriptions, these words will pop up in there, and you have all of these skills. But now you need to figure out how to relate them to the jobs that you're applying for. And this is kind of the fun part. Like this is the part that I really enjoyed. So I have a quick example for like project planning. All right, so like if I were speaking to my peers in astronomy and I was going to tell them about my dissertation project, basically, this is probably what I would say to them, something to this effect. Compact groups of galaxies are the most common configuration in the universe, but are these systems gravitationally bound together? Does the proximity of galaxies quench star formation or enhance it? Using detailed spectral analysis, I determined the redshifts of galaxies that appeared to be in compact groups from visual inspection. I then studied the chemical composition of the stellar populations in these galaxies to determine the star formation histories of the galaxies that were group members. All right, so who even understands that besides astronomers, right? I mean, you might be able to figure out what I'm saying here, but honestly, like this description here is fine if I'm like at an American Astronomical Society meeting and I'm meeting somebody and they ask me what my dissertation was on. I could say this to them and they would have a pretty clear understanding of what I did for my dissertation. They would also have a clear understanding of what went into accomplishing this. So they would know all of the steps I had to take to find these answers. But a person who's interviewing you for a job is not going to know all the steps that this took if you just explain it like this. Like a hiring manager or somebody reading your cover letter is going to be like, oh, cool. But how did you do it? Like they're not going to get that out of there. So a lot of times the results are not the most important part of your story when you're doing your hiring interviews. So if I was being interviewed by, say, like a hiring manager at the like magazine that I worked for, I would probably describe my dissertation something like this. I would say galaxies like our Milky Way are most commonly found very close together with other galaxies, like our local group. And then I might have to explain what that means, because not everyone knows what I mean when I say local group. I wanted to know if this arrangement had an effect on stars being created in individual galaxies. Like, does the Andromeda galaxy have an effect on the Milky Way? In order to do this, I had to plan out my project. First, I had to identify galaxies in these compact groups. I found a catalog of galaxies that could be studied from the southern hemisphere, where my department had access to a telescope. These galaxies did not have distances determined, so I had to develop an observation plan during newer crescent moons to measure their redshifts and any information I could about the chemical makeup of the stars. So this description also tells you what I did, but it clearly establishes that I was able to make a plan and follow through with it. So I was able to identify what needed to be done to answer my questions. And that's really what somebody who's hiring you to be like, in my case, to be an editor, they want to make sure that like, if you have a story idea, you know who you need to talk to and what questions you need to ask them to get what you need to write the story. So this is just an example of how you could reframe the process of your dissertation to emphasize your project management experiences. And sorry, I keep pausing. I have to keep like moving things out of the way on the screen so I can read my slide. So something else that I did here was I got rid of jargon also. So like there were words I used in the first description, like quench and star formation history and like spectral analysis and stuff like that. Compact groups even, like what, like if I just say those words to you, they're just like words smushed together. Like you don't really know what they mean to me when I'm talking about them. So a lot of times what I do when I do these talks is I ask the audience for some inputs on words that you think that are like used in your field of research that if somebody outside of your field heard them would think they had a completely different meaning. So like the example I usually give for physics is theory. So in physics, a theory is something that is, you know, well tested and established. And we are like, yeah, that's, you know, a thing that we use to understand the world. So like the theory of relativity, you know, Einstein came up with the theory of relativity in the early 1900s, but it has been tested very rigorously. And we find that it does a really good job of explaining what we see in the universe. So, but if I say that to somebody on the street and I say the word theory, they think it's like hypothesis or like something we think might be true, but we're still not sure. So when I'm talking about things in physics, I have to be very careful of the words I use. So if any of you have any ideas for any words in your field that are similar to that, I'd love to hear them. You can like put them in the chat. If you don't want to unmute, that's fine. We can just put words in the chat. And then I have more examples from physics, of course, because that's my field, but. Subjective, yeah, I have no idea what that could mean. I mean, I kind of have an idea, but like, I don't know what you mean by it when you're saying it. That's a good one. Transformation. Ah, yes. That's very good. Because in some fields that can have a very specific meaning. Linear. Okay. I like these. I might have to steal some of these and add them to my slide for later. I feel like I say that every time. Tubule. Okay. Like I just like saying that. Photo voice. Photo voice. Okay. I don't know what that means. No idea. Yeah, these are all really good, but it's this process of thinking about these words that we use all the time in our fields, right? Like harmonic too. Yes. In physics, it means yep, exactly. It's these words that we use all the time in our fields when we're talking with our peers, that if you said it to somebody else, like, you know, the person checking out your groceries at the grocery store, you have no idea what their background is. So you have no idea what they're going to think when you say these words. The process of identifying these, it can be kind of time consuming, but it is super helpful when you're thinking about what you're going to say in a job interview. So this is an example I like to give. Like if I was talking to somebody at like a AAS meeting or something, and they asked me what I studied. I don't study this anymore, but when I was a PhD student, this is what I studied. I study galaxies with small redshift differences to understand how their proximity to each other affects star formation activity. So usually if we were in person, I would ask you all to tell me what words you think are jargon. If you would like to put some answers in the chat, like which words on here you would be like, huh? If I said them to you, you can go ahead. Yeah, redshift. Yeah, that's a big one. Yeah, redshift differences. Nobody talks about redshift except scientists. One word that, so I highlighted in red some things people usually point out. Yes, redshift does mean it's moving away. It is also tells us the distance and the speed at which it is moving away from us. It's very complicated. Yay, astronomy. It's both. But galaxies is also a word. Like so if I show an audience, like a public audience, just like in a museum or something, pictures of random objects in space, and I ask them to tell me which ones are galaxies, they don't always do it right. So sometimes they'll point to nebula and say those are galaxies. So again, I have to be careful when I'm like talking to a public audience about my work, or even talking to like a hiring manager about what I did, because I have no idea what they're coming into our talk knowing before we start. So if I was talking to somebody who, say, had a background in political science, like my current boss, this is probably what I would say to her. And this is probably close to what I said to her when she interviewed me. The galaxies are made up of hundreds of billions of stars. Many galaxies live close to other galaxies in space. And I wanted to know if this influences their ability to make new stars. So I'm pretty much saying the same thing I said above, just I took out all the jargon. So I'm not just gonna like leave you with nothing. I gave Tithi some links to some different websites that can help you identify jargon. So the first one is XKCD Simple Writer. That one will, it's kind of silly, but it's also pretty illuminating, I guess. It will take, it basically tries to identify, like look at whatever you wrote. You can submit a bunch of text and it will look at all of the words and tell you if they are one of the most like 10,000 commonly used words in the English language. And it will highlight the ones that aren't. So like if I put my little sentence in there, it would definitely highlight redshift. It would definitely highlight galaxies. You know, it would highlight these words that are not commonly used. And so he used it to write silly things like how to describe the space shuttle. Instead of saying space shuttle, it was space goer upper or something. Like, so it's kind of funny, but it is useful to help you identify words that you may not have thought were jargon. Dejargonizer is similar, but a little more serious. And readable also. Both of these let you sort of pick the level at which you want your reader to be at. So like if you have an idea who your audience is, you can submit your text here and it will tell you if it's at that reading level or thing or whatever. So like you can take an abstract from a paper and plop it in these things and it will go through and identify words that are not easy for people to understand, I guess. But yeah, so hopefully that's helpful to people. I've used it a few times just to see like what it would do. So one other way to connect with your interviewer or the people, or like the hiring managers or HR, who's ever is going to be reading your cover letters, the AI bot or whatever that's reading your cover letters, maybe you need to connect with them too, I don't know, is to use something that you're pretty sure they're familiar with to explain a concept or some aspect of your research. So a lot of the times when I'm in interviews, I get asked the question, like, how did you determine what stars are made of? Like, how do you do that? And astronomers would ask me the same question, but they might ask it like, how did you determine the chemical composition of stars? Like, they'll ask it a little different, but they ultimately want to know, like, how did I do that? So if I was talking to an astronomer, I would say, analyzing the spectrum of each galaxy reveals the chemical composition of their stellar populations. And the astronomer would go, oh, and they would know what I did to do that. They would understand everything that went into that. I would not expect anyone else who is not an astronomer to understand anything I just said right there. So I spent some time trying to think of an analogy that would help people understand like what I was looking at to figure out what stars are made of. So if you know what the word spectrum means, you know, it's a way to like, sorry, my children are home from school. It's their last day. Yay. So if you know what the word spectrum means, you know that it means it's like a way to like spread something out so that you can see the detailed components of what it is. So an example of a spectrum that we are seeing everywhere this month is a rainbow. Rainbows are a spectrum of light. And I would use rainbows as an analogy since I was looking at the light from galaxies and spreading it out to see what was inside of it. I'm essentially looking at galaxy rainbows is what I was looking at. So usually when I'm talking about, I don't even say the word spectrum when I'm talking about the research that I did to an audience that does not include astronomers. I will just say I make galaxy rainbows. And I mean, pretty much everyone knows what a rainbow is, I hope. So basically, I'm looking at a rainbow of light from galaxies and places in the rainbow where colors are missing, or where colors are really bright. That basically tells me what elements are in the stars that are making up that light. Oh, sorry, those are all my jargon. So if I was explaining it to someone who's not an astronomer, I say something like, much like a prism spreads out sunlight to make a rainbow, I spread out the light from galaxies, and the colors revealed in this galaxy rainbow tell me what the stars that emitted this light are made of. So that's just an example of using an analogy. But all of these things that I'm talking about, like identifying jargon and coming up with analogies, they kind of rest on you knowing your audience, right? So you have to have an idea of who you are going to be telling these stories to or giving these examples to before you can decide how much jargon you're going to take out or like what analogies you're going to use. So this is a little chart that sort of helps you pick apart who your audience is before you go into it. You want to know who they are. You want to try to guess what they know already. And you can do that by, just like looking at your social media feeds or looking at the news, like how do people describe the topic that you're going to be talking about in the news? Because they usually have a pretty good idea of who their audience is and who's listening. And you also want to know what they care about. Have an idea of that. You can get those kinds of things for a job from like a mission statement or the job description itself. It should tell you what they're looking for and why they're probably interviewing you in the first place. And then you want to know your goal. In this case, the goal is hire me, please. Maybe the other things like take action, spread the word, bring awareness could be like a subsequent part of whatever you're talking to them about. But the ultimate goal here is to have them hire you. And then you want to make sure that you're interacting with the interviewer, which can be hard, I know, over video. I know a lot of interviews are still being done over video, but you really want to make eye contact. So, look at your camera, don't look down at your notes, up, around, or whatever. You want to look at the little light on your camera. If you ask any questions during the interview, make sure you actually listen to the answers and things like that. Don't just ask a question for the sake of asking a question. And just make sure you're having a conversation with the person, because ultimately that's what doing all this is, getting rid of jargon, using analogies. You're trying to make whatever you're talking about accessible to the interviewer so that they feel comfortable asking you more, or they feel like they actually understand what you're talking about and you're not just talking over their head. So another important part of this that you can use during interviews, if you would like, is to tell a story. So oftentimes, when I would get interviewed, I would get asked the question, why are you applying for this job? You have a PhD in physics and you love astronomy. So why are you applying for this job? So then I would have to get into telling the story, like I did at the beginning of this, about my journey. And a lot of the times I can use that as a way to highlight the skills that I've gained being a doctoral student. So I'm able to talk about how the instrument I was working on, I went to the telescope and I put it on the telescope, and I was working with the engineers at the observatory to make the instrument work. And finally they were like, you know what? This instrument is not going to work. And you have to tell your advisor that this instrument is not going to work. So in that story, I have examples of project management, of teamwork, of management, and then also managing expectations and having to how I handled talking to my advisor about that, and basically letting him know that the instrument he designed didn't work and it wasn't going to work. And now I had to come up with a new thesis project. So again, I was able to pivot, have a turning point, and fix it and get my PhD anyway, despite all of that. So these are all good elements for a story. So if you can identify characters, if you can set up a setting, if you can have a motivation for those characters, likely one of those characters is you, because you're being interviewed for a job about that you're going to do, not somebody else. Identifying conflict or a turning point makes it a little more exciting, like a soap opera. And then having some sort of ending or conclusion to the story is very helpful. So I know I'm giving you all this information, but I actually have some worksheets that can help you answer these questions about who your audience is and elements of whatever it is that you want to talk about that you can craft into a story. So if you want to save these, I have a Word version and a PDF version. You can save these and, bring them out whenever you're going to give a talk or going to do an interview, because likely, especially if you're being interviewed for a job that's not a faculty position, you're likely going to get asked some of these questions like, why are you applying for this job? What is it what changed in your career path? Because most people think that if you're going to get a PhD, you want to be a faculty member. That's not always true, but that's what people think. So it's one of these assumptions people have. So you're probably gonna have to answer questions like that. It's really fun. but I'm gonna make sure I don't. So yeah, that's pretty much everything that I wanted to tell you all about. But I wanted to leave time for questions because I know it was a lot of information. And I also like to give people time, like if you have any ideas in your head for like analogies that you'd like to test out, or like a story, or like a story, I guess, outline that you'd like to tell, I'd love to hear it. And then you're like testing it out on a pretty diverse audience. I'm sure we're all coming from different fields based on the jargon you all gave me. I can tell already that we're all from different fields.